I wasn't supposed to find it. Not really. It was one of those things that feels almost accidental, like stumbling into a room that doesn't exist. A name flickered in some old forum post, the lost episode, and at first I laughed. TV glitches, urban legends, fan edits, right. That's what I thought. But when I finally held it in my hands, that little VHS tape, dusty and unassuming, something in me told me I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. They say it aired only once. Once, and then it disappeared, leaving behind nothing but whispers. People who watched it, the few who survived the curiosity, said things that didn't make sense. Eyes that felt too sharp, smiles too wide, laughter that followed them long after the credits rolled. They claimed nightmares, paranoia, a subtle twisting of reality that never quite let go. I told myself they were exaggerating. I had to. Otherwise, the dread would swallow me before I even pressed play. And yet, here it was. The tape. Simple, silent, ordinary. Like any other piece of media, except that it was. It carried a weight. A quiet insistence that I look closer, that I watch. The kind of weight you feel in the pit of your stomach, the cold grip that doesn't let go even when the sun is bright, and the world outside feels perfectly normal. I thought I understood normal. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. If you're hearing this, reading this, you probably think you know horror. You probably think you've seen it all. You haven't. There's something about the way this episode moves, the way it waits for you, even now, that doesn't belong to the world you trust. And the more you try to rationalize it, the tighter it wraps around your mind. Secrets aren't meant to be seen, they whisper. Some knowledge carries a cost, and some things once found can't be unseen. I pressed play, and as the screen flickered to life, the first thing I noticed wasn't the picture, not really. It was the feeling, the almost imperceptible hum, like static across your skin, a vibration you can't name. The kind of feeling that says, you've crossed the threshold. There's no going back. And I knew, before the opening credits even finished rolling, that this wasn't a story anyone should have stumbled upon. But I did. And now you have too. I didn't plan to find it. Honestly, it wasn't like I was scouring the web for cursed media or digging through forgotten archives. That sort of obsession belongs to someone else. But one night, half awake and half bored, I was clicking through forums I didn't even remember subscribing to. Somewhere deep in a corner of the internet, buried under years of irrelevant posts and spam, I saw a link. It wasn't flashy, no bold warnings, no neon, click here if you dare. Just a tiny, almost polite suggestion. I think you'll want to see this if you can handle it. Oh, curiosity is a dangerous thing. I clicked, and there it was, a name I'd never forget once I saw it, the lost episode. The title alone carried this subtle insistence, like it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. Waiting for me to cross that invisible line. The file was small, almost laughably so, yet something in its metadata felt wrong. The timestamp was from decades ago. The creator listed was unknown. And the comments, oh, the comments. Mostly cryptic, fragmented. It's watching you back, don't blink. Once you start, you can't stop thinking about it. At first, I scrolled past, dismissing it. But something tugged at the back of my mind, the kind of persistent itch you can't scratch. I remembered the old VHS player gathering dust in my closet. My apartment had become this quiet, sterile little world. Empty coffee cups, the faint smell of stale air, the hum of a refrigerator that always felt too loud at night. Nothing about that space felt unsafe until I pulled the tape out. Dust puffed into the air, motes floating in the lamplight like tiny ghosts. I blew it off with the casual carelessness of someone who's handled tapes 1,000 times before. And then I held it. The label was handwritten, letters jagged and uneven, almost childlike, yet precise in its placement. Do not watch twice. I laughed nervously. Of course I laughed. That's what you do when you feel your heart pick up speed for no reason, when your fingers tremble slightly even, though you tell yourself it's nothing. It was just a tape, just a story, just entertainment. Except nothing about it felt normal. I set the tape on the player, pressed eject, slid it in. The hum of the machine sounded louder than it should have. The screen flickered to life with that warm, familiar glow of VHS static, but the light seemed to bend slightly, like it was stretching toward me. I paused, hand hovering over the remote. There was a sensation, subtle but unmistakable, crawling across my skin, the kind you feel when a shadow moves just beyond your vision. I considered leaving it. I really did. Every rational bone in my body screamed at me to turn away, to walk out and forget I ever saw that light. But I didn't. There's a part of curiosity that refuses reason, that whispers in the dark, you need to know. You need to see it. And I did. I pressed play. The first frames were mundane. A familiar set, a show that looked ordinary, nothing to hint at the horror that would unfold. The host smiled cheerfully. The audience laughed, pre-recorded, light and hollow. The contrast made my stomach twist. Everything felt just a little off. The lighting too flat, the shadows too long, and sometimes a laugh would linger after the joke had ended, echoing in ways it shouldn't. I squinted, thinking maybe it was a simple editing error, until the first flicker appeared. It was subtle at first. A shadow in the corner of a shot that shouldn't have been there. A reflection in a window that moved differently from the figure it mirrored. My fingers gripped the edge of the armrest, the faint static from the TV buzzing in my ears, vibrating against my bones. I tried to rationalize. It's old footage. Tape degradation. Digital artifacting. That's all. But then I saw it, a face in the background, pale, too still, eyes too bright. It disappeared when I blinked, and my blood ran cold. I knew in that instant something was off. Something that went beyond editing, beyond coincidence. I had crossed into a space where ordinary rules didn't apply, where normal television logic gave way to something else entirely. I leaned closer to the screen, heart hammering, every instinct screaming for me to stop. And yet I couldn't. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. I had no idea what was waiting for me, no sense of how far this would go. All I knew was that I couldn't turn away. The screen lit up fully now, flickering against the dim walls of my apartment, and the first real sign that this was not just a show, not just a recording, began to take shape. Something about it felt alive. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and whispered to myself, though I knew it wouldn't matter, this isn't. This is where it begins. And I knew, as the hum of the TV pressed against the silence of the room, that nothing would ever feel normal again. The first few minutes passed almost normally. At a glance, it looked like any other show from the era. A talk show, bright lights, an audience clapping, the host smiling in that practiced way that made everything feel safe. I found myself relaxing, the tight coil of dread in my chest loosening ever so slightly. The colors were just slightly too vivid, the laughter just a fraction too long, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just the age of the tape. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. And then I noticed the small things, the almost imperceptible irregularities that made the edges of the world feel wrong. The host would glance at someone in the audience, smile, and then the camera would shift in a way that didn't match the natural movement. One laugh seemed to echo before the joke had even landed. The crowd's applause would trail off into a static whisper, faint, almost like it wasn't recorded but remembered. At first, I laughed. It was ridiculous. I even muttered under my breath, who edits a show like this? But the laughter stuck with me. A kind of persistent vibration, a reminder that something was watching. And then I saw it, a figure in the back row, pale, shadowed, almost blurred, and yet its gaze was sharp, impossibly knowing. It didn't move like the rest of the audience. It didn't blink. And for a heartbeat, I could swear it was looking right at me. I paused, fumbling for the remote. I rewound, hoping to convince myself that I had imagined it. But the figure was still there, still staring. And then, in that brief moment of repetition, the tape seemed to skip in a way that wasn't mechanical. The image wavered, stretched, and the room in the video, the studio, the set, the audience, felt denser, heavier, as if the air inside it was pressing outward. My apartment felt lighter by comparison. Normal. Safe. And yet the tape hummed with a quiet insistence, as if it resented the contrast. I tried to focus on the host again, and that's when I noticed the whispering. Not part of the audio track, not a glitch. Something under the laughter, something soft, close, urgent. I leaned closer, straining to catch it. It was just syllables at first, meaningless, like someone practicing a language I didn't know. But there was intent in it, a rhythm that suggested it wanted me to understand. Or maybe it wanted me to listen. And I did. Against every instinct screaming to turn it off, I listened. The set began to feel alive. Shadows stretched at impossible angles, bending across the walls, slipping under chairs. Props seemed to twitch, just at the edge of perception. The host's smile, at first warm, now seemed sharp, exaggerated, almost painful in its symmetry. The audience clapped at the wrong moments, and sometimes I thought I saw their heads tilt in ways that no human body should. It was subtle, so subtle that I questioned my own eyes, but persisted. And then came the anomaly that truly broke the illusion. The screen flickered, and for a brief instant, the host's eyes were black holes. Not a trick of the tape, not a shadow. They were hollow, deep staring, and in that instant, it felt as if I were being assessed, weighed, considered. I jerked back, my pulse hammering in my ears, but when I looked again, the eyes were normal, or as normal as anything had seemed in this corrupted broadcast. I could feel my chest tighten. People who had watched this episode before described lingering effects, nightmares that refused to end, a sense that the world had subtly shifted around them. I had laughed at those stories before, but now, as the tape rolled on, I understood. The smallest anomalies, the whispers, the shadows, the timing of movements were not mistakes. They were invitations. Or warnings. Perhaps both. I started paying closer attention to the details. Background objects seemed to rearrange themselves between shots. Letters on a board shifted when I blinked. Faces in the audience sometimes turned toward me, their expressions unchanging yet imploring. The tape wasn't merely recorded. It was alive, or at least pretending to be, and it was trying to interact with me. By now, I was leaning forward, gripping the edges of my couch like a lifeline. Every laugh, every flicker of movement felt deliberate. The world outside my apartment, the mundane, safe world, suddenly felt distant, flimsy. I was here in this half-light, tethered by the humming glow of a screen that should have been ordinary. And I realized with a creeping, hollow dread that the episode knew I was watching. At one point, a hand reached out from a shadowed corner of the set. Not part of the performance, not a camera trick. It lingered at the periphery, blurred but tangible, like smoke trying to take human shape. I blinked and it was gone. But the feeling remained. Something had entered my space, my perception. Something that didn't belong in the normal rules of television. Something that whispered of permanence. By the time the opening credits rolled, familiar, yet somehow distorted, I was no longer just a viewer. I was part of it. A participant. I couldn't explain how it had happened, and honestly, I didn't want to. All I knew was that what I had laughed at a few minutes ago, the tape, the lost episode, the legend, was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against my mind. Watching, waiting, and I could feel it inching closer with every frame. I swallowed hard and leaned back, heart pounding, as the next segment began. This was when the tape stopped being a story. This was when it became an experience, one that I feared I might not survive intact. And I realized with a sinking certainty that the further I watched, the less likely I would ever return to the world I had known. The further I watched, the more my apartment seemed to dissolve around me. Shadows no longer belonged solely to the corners of the room. They slithered along the walls, pooling like liquid before recoiling whenever I tried to focus on it. The hum of the tape grew insistent, vibrating in my skull, punctuated by whispers that weren't in the audio. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the overactive response of someone alone in the dark, but then I heard my name. It wasn't spoken aloud, not in the usual way. It was drawn from the static itself, a hissed, elongated echo. The bubica, the hairs on my arms stood on end. I froze. The screen flickered, momentarily washing my room in pale, distorted light. There on the set, the host had paused mid-laugh and was staring directly at me. No, not the screen. I felt him look into my space, into my reality. His mouth moved, forming words I could not hear, but the intent was unmistakable. He knows you're here. He knows I'm watching you. Then the audience shifted. Faces blurred, eyes stretching impossibly, necks craning in ways that shouldn't exist. And in the far back, the pale figure, the one I had glimpsed before, turned fully toward me. Its gaze pierced through the screen, and my stomach sank. This wasn't just a recording. This was something else. Something alive. And it knew I was alone. I tried to turn off the tape. Fumbling, my fingers shaking over the buttons, but the screen refused to go black. The image stayed stubborn, as if the machine itself had become a conduit, tethering me to this episode. Every movement I made was mirrored in some subtle way on the screen. I blinked and my living room warped in my peripheral vision, shadows stretching unnaturally, walls flickering in and out of alignment. I whispered, my voice shaking, "It's just a tape. It's just a show." But even as I said it, the host tilted his head, a smile creeping across his face, perfectly in time with my words. He spoke finally, and the words reached my mind directly, bypassing ears entirely. "You shouldn't have come back." What? The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't random. Names, phrases, fragments of sentences, some warning, some taunt. "You watched it once, you'll watch it again. It's not enough to look away." My heart raced. The sensation was physical, as if the tape's presence pressed against my chest, shaping my breathing, stealing my control. I realized then that stopping the episode might not matter. Once it had my attention, it didn't let go. And then came the dialogue. The host, the audience, even the shadows, they spoke to me. Or rather, through me. One line repeated over and over, though no one else in the room could possibly have heard it. "They're coming. They're always coming." My apartment grew colder, the air thick with something wet and metallic, though I could not see it. The sound of breathing, deep and irregular, filled my ears. I spun around, expecting to find another person, but the room was empty, save for the static light of the television. The tape's images began to fragment further. Sections skipped, rewound, flashed, clips from the show overlaid with something else. Faces I didn't recognize appeared briefly, pale and twisted, staring directly at me. One frame lingered longer than it should have, a blurry figure pointing, gesturing, its mouth opening impossibly wide. I realized with sudden, icy dread that it was pointing at me, at my space, my reality. I tried to leave the room. I wanted to run, to escape. But the hallway behind me stretched impossibly, shadows pooling and shifting, elongating the familiar into something monstrous. The whispers followed, persisting, climbing in volume, turning into words I could understand. "There is no exit. Not for you. Not tonight." I froze in the doorway, feeling the weight of the episode pressing on me from all sides, the boundaries between tape and life dissolving. And just as I thought it couldn't escalate further, the screen changed. It wasn't the host anymore. It was me. My own face distorted, eyes wide, staring back with a mix of terror and understanding I had not yet felt. My mouth opened and I could hear my voice from the tape. "Don't look away. Don't turn it off." I stumbled back, heart hammering, trying to rationalize. It couldn't be real. It was a reflection, a trick, a glitch, anything but the truth. But the whispers confirmed it. They spoke now as a chorus, layered, omnipresent. "You are part of it. You are never leaving. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to pulse in time with my racing heartbeat, every flicker of light drawing me in further. The tape wasn't passive. It was hunting, learning, integrating. And in that moment, I understood fully the warnings of those who had watched before me. The climax of this first escalation arrived without fanfare. The pale figure in the audience reached out through the screen, hands stretching unnaturally long, clawing toward me. The host's smile widened, impossibly, stretching across the room. And the final whisper, low and close, almost in my ear, shook me to the core. You're next. What? I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. My chest heaved as the screen's glow swallowed the room, the shadows now part of the same oppressive weight pressing down on me. And in that moment, I understood. The episode wasn't just a story. It was a force, aware, patient, and relentless. I whispered to myself, desperate, this isn't real. It's just a show. What? But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. The tape pulsed in response, as if mocking me. And I knew that nothing in my world would ever feel normal again. The moment I turned off the tape, I expected relief. Silence, darkness, normalities. Instead, I found that reality itself had shifted. My apartment felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Every shadow seemed longer, darker, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that the pale figure, that impossible audience member, was still there somewhere, watching from the edges of my perception. That night I went to bed, exhausted, telling myself sleep would reset me. It didn't. The dreams began almost immediately. I saw the host smiling, impossibly wide, standing in corners of rooms I had never been in, whispering in a voice I recognized but couldn't place. My own face would appear behind him, or sometimes in the crowd, eyes wide with fear, mouth moving in silent panic. I'd wake up in the dark, heart pounding, sure I'd heard footsteps in the hallway, only to find my apartment empty. During the day, I couldn't focus. The world seemed to shimmer at the edges of perception, small anomalies that I would normally dismiss but now demanded attention. Streetlights flickered in sequences that mirrored patterns from the episode. Conversations overlapped, words repeating in unnatural sync. People's faces seemed subtly wrong, expressions frozen for a heartbeat too long. I began noticing details I hadn't before, marks on walls, objects slightly out of place, reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality. And every time I turned to the television, even when it was off, I swore I could see static rippling, forming shapes that vanished if I looked directly at them. I started avoiding mirrors. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing that pale figure reflected behind me, or worse, my own distorted face as it appeared on the tape. I spoke less to friends, withdrew from the world, afraid that someone might notice the change, the haunted look creeping into my eyes. I felt the pull of the episode constantly, a tug at the edge of awareness, whispering that it had not finished with me. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was all psychological, that the tape was a trick of memory and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. The episode had followed me. It had a reach. I started seeing small anomalies outside my apartment. A shadow in a coffee shop that mimicked my movements. A reflection that didn't belong. Random strangers whose faces lingered in my mind long after passing, as though the episode had threaded them into my perception. I began noticing patterns, images from the tape appearing in street posters, in old TV reruns, in digital glitches on my phone. My sleep became fragmented. Every time I closed my eyes, the whispers returned, faint and insistent. I realized the tape didn't just record images, it recorded attention. It adapted, integrating me into its world. My memory of normal life began to fracture. I would forget simple things, only to remember them later in distorted fragments, often with the shadows of the episode bleeding in. My own voice sometimes repeated lines I had heard on the tape. My apartment no longer felt like mine. Every object, every corner, every flicker of light carried the pulse of that episode, as if it had claimed the space. By the third night, I was desperate. I wanted to escape the apartment, escape the world entirely. But leaving didn't help. The episode existed in layers, in light and sound, in perception itself. The whispers followed me into the streets. I started keeping notes, scrawled reminders of reality, lists of things I knew to be true. Yet even the notes would shift slightly when I returned later, phrases erased, letters blurred, lines that hadn't been there before. The final, undeniable moment came when I saw it in my own reflection. Not the pale figure, not the host, myself but wrong. The eyes were blacker than they should have been, the mouth twisting into the faintest, sinister smile. I recoiled, shaking, and the reflection winked, something I never do. That's when I knew. This episode didn't end when the tape stopped. It followed me home. It followed anyone who dared to see it. It infected perception, memory, reality. And I realized with a dread I cannot put into words that I could no longer trust myself, my senses, or the world I once believed to be stable. I had to understand it. I had to know how a simple recording could unravel a mind, manipulate perception, and reach beyond the screen. I began searching, forums, archives, anything that could explain its origin. But everywhere I turned, fragments of the episode lingered, comments warning me, images I didn't recognize, whispers too faint to hear but heavy enough to feel. I understood then that the tape was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. I didn't know if researching it would save me or drive me deeper. But I had no choice. Ignoring it wasn't an option. The episode had my attention, my mind, my reality. And the more I learned, the clearer it became. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was part of it. I dove into the rabbit hole without hesitation, though every instinct screamed at me to stop. The episode had entwined itself into my life, and ignorance was no longer an option. I started with the forums, the old, dusty corners of the internet where someone, decades ago, had first whispered about the tape. The posts were cryptic, fragmented, mentions of a broadcast that aired once, reports of viewers experiencing lingering effects, people vanishing entirely. Most had been deleted, but cached fragments remained, like scars on the web. One username kept recurring, Elias M. Nobody knew who they were, but they had posted detailed accounts of viewers describing phenomena almost identical to mine. It watches through you, one post read. It waits until you let your guard down. Another, the edges of the world bend to its will. You think you leave it behind, but it follows. Comments beneath these posts were almost religious in their reverence or terror. I scrolled for hours, every fragment making my pulse quicken. I reached out to people who claimed to have witnessed it years ago. One email reply came from a man named Darren, cautious and cryptic. If you found it, don't try to understand it. You only get deeper. Everything you see now is a shadow of what is real. Some knowledge carries a cost, and this is beyond any cost you could imagine. His words resonated, though instead of fear, I felt a compulsive need to continue. I couldn't stop. Searching deeper, I discovered references to a broadcasting anomaly, a single network airing, forgotten in the schedules, erased from archives. Staff members involved in production were hard to track down. Some had died in odd circumstances, others disappeared without explanation. The few who remained declined to speak, their faces pale, eyes darting as if the very mention of the episode summoned danger. One archivist whispered, almost as a warning, "It's not meant for the living, not really. And if you keep looking, you'll become part of it." I collected scan notes, old production scripts, emails, forum posts, even blurred images of the set. The more I pieced together, the darker the picture became. There were whispers that the episode wasn't just a show, it was a ritual. Subtle manipulations embedded within the footage, designed not to entertain, but to observe, to reach. Patterns repeated across scenes, sequences encoded into audio frequencies, frames lasting too briefly for the conscious mind, but too persistently for the subconscious. It was as if the tape itself had rules, unwritten, unbroken, yet absolute. Even stranger, I found references to other lost broadcasts, similar in nature, each surfacing only once before disappearing. The thread connected them all, forbidden knowledge, a hint of something beyond human understanding, viewers drawn into a cycle they could never escape. The episode I had watched wasn't unique. It was one link in a chain that reached further than I wanted to comprehend. I began seeing echoes of it everywhere. Footage posted online months ago seemed eerily similar, static, whispers, eyes staring just beyond the frame. Accounts of nightmares, hallucinations, and vanished individuals littered old archives. People called it cursed, haunted, viral. I called it inevitable. The deeper I looked, the more the edges of reality seemed to fray, as if the episode had stretched out from the screen into the world around me. And yet, the strangest, most chilling discovery came from a fragment of a recording. In the background of one frame, barely visible, was someone or something, looking directly at the camera, a pale figure whose eyes seemed aware, knowing. It wasn't part of the production crew, nor the audience. The image lingered in my mind, impossible to dismiss, like a question I didn't want answered but couldn't ignore. I realized then that my own presence might have been anticipated. That the episode, in some ineffable way, had called me to it, woven me into its cycle. Everything I found only made it worse. I wished I hadn't looked. Wished I could unsee the files, delete the posts, ignore the emails. But I couldn't. The knowledge had already rooted itself, gnawing at the edges of my perception. I understood now why previous viewers went silent, why some disappeared. The episode wasn't just a recording, it was a force. Alive in ways I could not define, aware, patient, and infinitely persistent. And then I realized it wasn't just the episode anymore. My apartment, my mind, my reality, all had become extensions of it. It waited not only in the screen, but in every shadow, every flicker of light, every half-remembered whisper. I had hoped research would help me survive it, would give me distance. Instead, it confirmed the worst truth. The episode didn't belong to the past. It belonged to now. And I was part of it. It started with the lights. My apartment flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls in impossible patterns. Every object seemed heavier, darker, infused with some quiet malice. The hum from the television was no longer just noise. It had become a pulse, syncing with my heartbeat, echoing through my chest. I wanted to leave, to escape, but the doors weren't just closed. They felt wrong, distant, as if the very architecture of my apartment had warped. The tape wasn't on, yet I could hear it. Whispers curling around my ears, murmuring my name in every tone imaginable. Abubakar, Abubakar. I stumbled toward the screen instinctively, though nothing should have been there. The glow of static filled the room, shaping itself into forms I could barely comprehend. The host, audience, the pale figure, stretching, twisting, alive in ways that violated physics. They weren't just on the screen anymore. They were in the room, in me, everywhere. Stop watching, a voice hissed from the shadows, yet it carried no fear. It was command. The host's mouth moved silently on the static, and I could feel the words in my skull. You cannot stop now. We have waited for you. My breath caught. I realized that the episode had rewritten the rules. Time, space, even my own body no longer adhered to normal logic. I was inside it, and it was inside me. The pale figure approached. Each step was a distortion, warping the floor beneath it, shadows spiraling in impossible directions. I tried to move backward to flee, but the hallway behind me stretched infinitely, the walls melting like candle wax. The whispers multiplied, overlapping into a chorus of accusations, warnings, and commands. You belong here. You are part of it. You cannot leave. I saw myself on the screen, screaming silently. The host mirrored my panic, his smile wider than reality could allow. The audience clapped, unnervingly slow, yet in perfect sync with my heartbeats. I tried to cover my ears, but the whispers seeped into my skull, threading themselves into my thoughts. I realized the tape didn't just observe, it anticipated, learned, manipulated. Every fear, every hesitation, every rational thought was weaponized against me. Why are you here? I demanded, voice trembling. The room responded, not with words, but with presence. Shadows thickened, walls pulsed. The pale figure extended its hand, impossibly long, stretching toward my chest. I felt a pressure, a tug, a sensation of being pulled not only from my space, but from my own reality. Then came the reflections. Mirrors I hadn't noticed before, fragments of glass, puddles of water on the floor, they all showed me differently. Sometimes my face, sometimes someone else's, always watching, always aware. I saw eyes where there should have been none, mouths forming words I didn't speak, hands reaching toward me from impossible angles. Panic surged, my mind fracturing, and I realized that every normal expectation I had held onto, walls, doors, furniture, light, was meaningless here. The host's voice pierced me directly this time. It's your turn. Watch closely. Participate. Belong. The pale figure pressed closer, and the static on the TV rippled violently, flashing images I could barely register, faces of other viewers, distorted and terrified, interspersed with symbols that burned into my retina. I felt the pull of them all, as if the episode was reaching across decades, across realities, drawing me into a lineage of observers who never left. My thoughts fractured further. I couldn't distinguish between what I remembered and what the episode planted in my mind. Laughter echoed, warped, distant yet close. I felt hands on my shoulders, unseen but undeniable. Every step I took, every breath I drew, carried weight of unseen eyes, weight of expectation, weight of the episode itself. I understood in a gut-deep way why viewers vanished. The episode didn't just consume attention, it consumed existence. And then something changed. The walls themselves seemed to open, revealing the studio of the episode, impossibly larger than it should be. The host, now fully corporeal in my perception, smiled wider than humanly possible, his eyes glinting with intent. "Welcome," he said. "You are part of it now." The pale figure lingered at the edge, waiting, patient. I understood that resistance was meaningless. Escape was a concept that no longer applied. I was folded into it, my reality rewritten, my identity a layer of the episode itself. I screamed. My own reflection screamed back. The whispers converged into a single, unbearable chorus, repeating my name, my thoughts, my fears. The apartment, the room, the floor, the ceiling, they all became the episode. There was no separation, no boundary. I could feel my past self, my present self, all versions of me becoming data, content, trapped in a loop designed to stretch, observe, and manipulate. I realized with cold clarity that the episode didn't end at the screen. It wasn't contained. It was patient. It was aware. And now it had me. The final horrifying moment came when I saw the audience turn fully toward me. Not just on the screen, they were everywhere. And the pale figure whispered, low, intimate, "Do you understand now? There is no outside. Only us. Only the watch." What? I don't know how long I stayed frozen, eyes locked on the screen that was no longer just a screen. I don't know if I blinked or breathed. The boundaries of time felt meaningless. All I knew was that I had become part of the story, part of the broadcast, and that in some way the episode was laughing. And in the quietest, darkest corner of my mind, I wondered, am I still myself? Or has the episode claimed me entirely? I thought turning off the tape would be the end, but the episode didn't care about endings. Days blurred into nights, and nights became an endless loop of whispers and shadows. My apartment never truly returned to normal. Light flickered oddly, objects shifted subtly when I wasn't looking, and the faint, insistent pulse of static lingered at the edges of perception. It was never loud, never overt, but it was constant, like the rhythm of a second heartbeat I could not escape. Sleep was a fragile illusion. I lay down hoping for rest, only to find the episode replaying behind closed eyelids. Faces twisted in impossible ways, the host smiling with a knowledge that felt personal, intimate. The pale figure appeared in every shadow, sometimes blurred, sometimes crisp, always watching. I would wake drenched in sweat, certain I had heard my own voice echoing the lines from the tape. You are part of it now. The outside world offered no sanctuary. Streetlights flickered in familiar patterns from the episode. Advertisements carried subliminal echoes of its static, and reflections, mirrors, windows, even water surfaces, revealed the audience watching me, waiting. Friends noticed my absence, my distracted glances, my muttered half-sentences. I avoided them, fearing that acknowledging my perception aloud might invite the episode further into reality. I was alone, trapped between the known and the impossible, between memory and hallucination. Research brought no comfort. Every forum, every archive, every fragment of history I unearthed deepened the dread. The episode was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a lineage of broadcasts designed to infiltrate attention, to linger in perception, to reach across decades. Every viewer who had encountered it became, in some sense, its extension. I had become one of them. And yet, despite all this, there was a compulsion I could not resist. I found myself returning to the recordings, to the discussions, to the fragments of the episode online. Even the smallest glimpse, a frame, a whisper, drew me in, insistent, irresistible. Curiosity had mutated into obsession. I realized that the episode's power was not just in what it showed, but in what it promised, in the secrets it teased, in the suggestion that understanding it could unlock forbidden knowledge. I often find myself speaking to it, muttering warnings and questions, though I know it listens without answering. Sometimes I think I see movement in the corner of my eye, subtle distortions that hint at the pale figure returning. Other times I hear static whispering my name in patterns too familiar to ignore. Every time I am reminded, the episode does not end. It never ends. Its reach extends beyond the screen, beyond the room, beyond comprehension. And now, as I recount this, I realize you are part of it too. If you are reading these words, if you have found this story, then the episode's reach may be touching you, just as it touched me. Curiosity is dangerous. The desire to know, to witness, to experience, it is what it feeds on. Some knowledge carries a cost, and this knowledge is eternal. I have learned one thing: ignoring it is impossible. Watching it may be worse. And though I cannot unsee what I have seen, I can warn you. There is no escape. The episode lingers, patient and aware, waiting for the next person who dares to seek it out. You may think you can resist. You may think it is only a story, only a memory, only a recording. But if you have made it this far, it has already begun to touch you. And if your phone or computer hums with a faint static, if the shadows in your room seem just a little too long, if you think you hear whispers in the silence, know this: it is real. It is always real. The tape is waiting. And once it finds you, there is no going back.